August slipped away into a moment in time. Well, it's August 1st, so like I can't really say that with confidence, but I can say that July did not slip away. In fact, it crawled or inched forward at a snail's fucking pace. So it's finally the end of July, and so I can bring to you my July wrap up. Hi, welcome to A Sunny Book Nook. My name is Sunny, and today I am going to be talking to you about all 20 of the books I read in the month of July. I feel like towards the beginning of July, I was like, I haven't been reading as much, but then I looked, and the past couple months, I've been reading around like 15 books per month, and so this is a bit of a hike up, I would say. I think I did a lot more reading in the second half of the month because the first week or so I was still hosting my best friend Renaissance, who is also my podcast co-host for the Lavender Menace. We were just busy, so I didn't really get that much reading done, but when they left and when I was now, at the height of summer, sitting around reading, I got through a lot more books. And I would say that this month was a very, very good reading month because I got to some authors that I think are new all-time favorites. Maybe that's, I'm jumping too far ahead to say that, but I am going to say that because I think it's true. If you are a patron for my Patreon page, you would have already seen me talk about the first 5 of these books that I've read, I would say. And if you want to be a patron and support my channel, because I don't really take sponsorships or anything, most people make the majority of their income off of sponsorships, I don't really take them. Please support me on Patreon if you would like to see bonus content from me, and also just to support the channel in general, if you have the means to do so and if you want to, because I do at least one exclusive video every month, and it's usually me doing a mid-month check-in with my reading, sort of like my plans and what I've read and my thoughts on them so far, a little bit more fresh in my mind because I just read them, as opposed to now when I'm talking about these books, I have sort of forgotten about the first few, I would say. So if you want more detailed thoughts on that, you can join my Patreon and view that video. I also do personalized book recommendations on there. You can get, your one-on-one time with me. Of course, you can get that via my Instagram DMs or whatever elsewhere, but that's just sort of guaranteed for patrons. And I also do postcards that I send out to people if you want to join the highest tier. And I'm probably going to do a thing where I paint bookmarks and send them out to people sometime in the near future. Let me know if you'd be interested in that for my Patreon. I also give people ad-free access to my videos on the second tier, the $10 tier a month, and you guys also get more direct input onto what I'm going to read and what videos I should film, and stuff like that. So if that sounds at all interesting to you, please join. It's always linked in my description. Anyways, with that plug out of the way, maybe I'll insert some clips from my mid-month wrap-up into here so you can sort of see what I thought of the book when I initially read it, or had only read it a couple days ago, versus what I'm saying about it now. I think that could be kind of interesting maybe, and so you can also get a taste of like the type of stuff that I'm recording on Patreon, like exclusively, just videos that are exclusively for patrons. So anyway, back to starting off talking about the books I read in chronological order that I read them. The first book I read was The First Bad Man by Miranda July, and the reason why I read this book is because I was interested in reading some Miranda July novels since I love her movie Kajillionaire so much, and it's such a strange movie. It's just such an interesting concept that is fleshed out in such an interesting, compelling way, and sort of examines loneliness and queer womanhood and tension in family and social dynamics that I was so entranced by when I watched that movie. I was just interested in reading July's novels. The First Bad Man follows this middle-aged-ish woman who is single, lives in her house alone, and she works at this company, gets her co-worker's daughter foisted upon her and living in her house, and this daughter is a smelly mess, but who's also like very hot. in an interesting way, and our main character has to deal with the presence of this other person in her home now, who is very disrespectful of like her space, but our main character has no way of setting boundaries or like communicating because she is so awkward and like lonely and doesn't really have that much experience with other people. And that also is why she becomes obsessed with her boss, who is actually getting involved with this teen girl and trying to use our main character as a way to absolve himself of any guilt for getting involved in this pedophilic, fucked up relationship. And our own main character's sort of adoration of the boss clouds her judgment of this, but she also gets into this weird psychosexual relationship with the woman who's living in her house, not even on her own terms, because they end up like physically fighting each other. It's some crazy shit, bro. Like, I think a theme for books I read in July is crazy ass shit. I thought it was such an interesting read. I gave it 4 stars, and it was just so gross and unsettling in this way that still felt sympathetic, and like our main character was so deluded in so many ways, and she was just so fucking strange in her decisions. It was just like a train wreck. It didn't even necessarily have to do with what was actually going on, and more so had to do with like her thought process and reactions to what the fuck was going on, which what the fuck was going on was still crazy. That shit was unreal. And, you know, I think that the writing style didn't do as much for me, which is like in this novel format, which is why it was a 4-star, not a 5. Like, it didn't give me 5-star vibes, but I did want to read more of her books, so that's why I read her other book, a short story collection, No One Belongs Here More Than You. And this book I also rated 4 stars. I enjoyed a lot of these short stories. I thought they were also deranged, featuring deranged characters who are in even more deranged situations. There is one short story in here about this young woman who moves out to somewhere that's like the middle of nowhere and becomes a swim coach, but is calling her parents over the phone every day, lying to them about working for a nonprofit youth center. And she also gets involved with this girl who then leaves her in this abandoned shack they were going to reconstruct into like a living space. I'm forgetting other particular plots within the collection, but that's the general feeling I get from Miranda July's writing, is that it's more about the vibes that emerge from the weird shit that's going on in the stories and in the narratives and with the characters, more so than it is about what actually occurs in the narrative. I don't know, maybe Sunny from 2-3 weeks ago can say something more interesting about these books than I can. Her tone and her type of character is so memorable because they're such strange, deluded people who are so fucked up, but also so sympathetic, but also so disgusting. Very like Eileen, Otessa Moshfegh, My Year of Rest and Relaxation Core, but like to a more extreme of weirdness, I would say. I really like the short stories The Swim Team and Sister, or The Sister. Like, I think a lot of Miranda July's short stories and stories are very queer and like lesbian, and so is The Sister, which isn't queer or lesbian. It's about this old man whose friend is like, hey, you should meet my sister, you should meet my sister, you should meet my sister, but the crux is that there is no sister, and they're just, it's like she loves to toe the line of like sexual desire and loneliness and sadness and all of this shit that's like so complicated, and it feels so raw, and I'm just kind of obsessed with that, and I want to read all of her books and watch all of her movies because I'm kind of obsessed with her mind. Miranda July, like, you are a genius. Anyways, but then I read yet another short story collection. I'm a big short story collection lover. It's quite evident in my reading. But, oh, I should definitely, if you guys are interested, I will definitely make a short story collection recommendations video. If that sounds interesting to you, question mark, let me know in the comments down below. Cat Person and Other Stories by Kristen Raupenian. The story, Cat Story, was in the New Yorker like 5 years ago or something, and it sort of was a huge deal. Like, everyone was talking about it, and the way that it conveyed young female sexuality in the context of coercive sexual dynamics and relationships in a more complicated way than a single narrative, and that sort of shows the complexities of a teenage girl's like thought process in going into getting involved in like a sexual relationship with an older man that she met at her workplace. But I think a lot of Cat Person and Other Stories explores the sort of complicated nature of sexual relationships between young women and the people that they're around. And the first story in this is sort of like an incidental throuple situation that has to do with sort of some sadism and control things that gets a little bit out of hand. And there's other stories in here that I found incredibly well written and very interestingly crafted in the way that it sort of looked and tore into the psyches of these different characters. There is a lot of sadism and interrogation of like the shit that does harm to others and to ourselves in these stories, and they all primarily follow women of all ages. It was quite brilliant and a really strong collection that sort of revealed to me that feminist fiction can be good and not overwrought. I rated it 4.5 stars. I think that it's this collection kind of shows me and is a good example of how the short literary narrative can be itself like a thing that you can master as opposed to, you know, a long form story. You know, a short form story is also something that is really hard to masterfully construct, and I think Kristen Raupenian does a great job at that. I just think that, you know, it's been a few weeks since I've read this, and I had to sort of glance back at the Goodreads description to see what the different stories in it were about to like sort of jog my memory. So I just don't think that it was memorable enough for me to give it like a 5 stars, I would say. That is that book. And now to talk about Tunneling to the Center of the Earth by Kevin Wilson. I really enjoyed Kevin Wilson's novel Nothing to See Here, so I wanted to check out the short story collection, which is equally as Southern Gothic strange, but in a very normal way. Like, it's these situations that feel so typical and on the surface, I guess, but unfold in a way that tells and exposes something about, I don't know, the fucking human condition or whatever. Just generally speaking, I enjoyed this quite thoroughly. I thought that a lot of the short stories were really interesting, and I would definitely recommend it. Also, I have to head out right now, but I will be back. I might be dressed differently, the lighting might be different, I'm sorry, but, you know, we've only gone through the first fucking 12% of this wrap up, so I'll see you soon, but for you it'll be in the next second. Okay, Sunny is back, but also it's super windy outside right now despite it being a fucking heat wave here in St. Louis, so sorry if you can hear the wind in the background. Anyways, to continue with the July wrap up, I liked quite a few stories in here. Others were less memorable. I'm going to give you past Sunny's thoughts from my Patreon exclusive video, just so you can get a taste of the video and like my more recent thoughts and memories from this book. I've also noticed that like, this is probably a me issue, but when I'm reading short story collections, usually by the second half of the short story collection, the latter half of the short stories start not hitting as hard. Like, they start not being as standout in my mind, maybe because they just start blurring together more. But the thing is that I could try to mitigate that by like reading them further apart, but I do love binging a whole short story collection at once and like getting a taste of the author's like range, because I do think in Tunneling to the Center of the Earth, the title short story didn't really grip me. I don't really remember much of it, but his other short stories, there were some that still kind of are still memorable to me. Like, there was one about this girl whose uncles and dad are all fighting for the family inheritance, and doing so through like a paper crane game that I found really memorable. And I just feel like generally the atmosphere of his books, of that Southern Gothic fabulism shit, is just very slay. The book that I read after that was another short story collection that was kind of strange, called Unclean Jobs for Women and Girls by Alissa Nutting, who is quickly becoming / is one of my favorite authors. Unclean Jobs for Women and Girls was a book that I rated 4 stars, and I don't know, maybe I have to change that rating because it's still been living in my mind in a way that a lot of other short story collections I just can't say the same for, you know? But this book is absolutely wild. The short stories are all about women and girls who are employed or in the midst of a job that is very strange. One of the short stories is about this porn star in the future who gets sent to space to judge a food eating contest. That was really weird. There's a story about a woman who ends up being sexually attracted to the garden gnomes who come to life at night and fuck in front of her. There's a story about this woman who gets ants injected into her bones. Just some crazy shit. And then there's less crazy stories that are still kind of wild. There's this 16-year-old who is trying to get an abortion, and her grandma can't talk because she's a smoker, and like there's a hole in her throat. There's one about this woman whose mom got like frozen as a part of her prison sentence for like murdering her husband in front of her daughter, and our daughter breaks into the cryo-freeze facility and unfreezes her mom, and then shit occurs, but that parallels her talking to this guy on the internet. And there's also a story about a woman who is the drugged out girlfriend of a cult leader rock star and is embroiled in the spirituality pseudo science bullshit of like worshiping the worm or whatever. Meanwhile, her sister is always trying to get a hold of her in order to get, you know, some practical shit done. But yeah, there's like, all the stories in here were so wild, but they were written in a way that were so gripping and almost grounded that the imaginative element of it still felt realistic in how it was playing out, in the ways that all of these stories examine these wild ass relationships that women have with each other and the world and family and themselves and sex and their bodies and their relationships to men. And yeah, it was just so wild, and I loved it, to be quite honest. So it might be not a 4-star, but more of like a 4.5 star. I would definitely say it's a phenomenal short story collection, and because I loved Alissa Nutting's writing style here, I wanted to pick up her other book that I had also seen on Instagram, like someone's Bookstagram gave like a review of this book, Tampa, and I was immediately intrigued by the premise because it's about this middle school teacher woman who is a pedophile and specifically teaches at this middle school so that she can get access to like young boys and have sex with them. This book I rated like 4.5 or 5 stars. I really, really enjoyed this book. Well, enjoy is like a weird term to apply to a book that is so dark and disturbing, but I thought that it was brilliantly rendered because it's this 26-year-old woman who's a bombshell blonde, like hot and knows it and puts in extensive upkeep into being hot so that she can, you know, best bring in the young boys. Okay, also pause, I just got distracted and I realized that this shirt is a shirt that I wore in a different video, and so sorry if that's kind of bothersome to you because it's now bothering me. But anyways, our main character is married to this guy who is a cop, but he comes from money and he's just a total fucking asshole. But she's very calculated in how she thinks about the relationships in her life. So she understands that her relationship and her marriage to this cop guy is a way for her to be under the radar and also have the security and the financial and social safety net of having a husband who has that certain social standing and persona. And as a teacher at the school, she like strategically befriends people so that she can get away with what she wants to do. And then she manipulates these boys and these children into being in relationships with her while she sort of twists their feelings and plays with them emotionally so that she can get what she wants out of it. She is a master at manipulation, and she is so calculated in all of her approaches to all of these different, you know, things that she tries to do, that it's almost fucking impressive, like it very much is, to see all of the different very pointed steps she follows and lives out her life in order for her to do what she wants to do, which is actively be a pedophile predator. And as you would imagine, the story kind of goes off the rails from there. Stuff happens that is not ideal for anyone involved. Not that pedophilia was ever going to be an ideal story and situation, but I think that also the way that this book examines and looks at like gender and sexuality and desire and patriarchy and violence and grooming is so interesting. It takes this common trope of, you know, a male teacher or a man professor or whatever trying to get with a woman who is several decades his junior or whatever. And this is such a common theme throughout so much of literature that, and she kind of, Alyssa Nutting took that but in a different direction in a really fascinating way. And I just really adored the writing of this, and I think that the concept was delivered in a fascinating and very interesting way. So I would definitely recommend that if, you know, you're down to read some fucked up, disturbed shit and aren't massively triggered by the explicit grooming and abuse of children. I mean, I think like the other thing is that because she is like seducing and manipulating and drawing in kids who are like 13, 14-year-old teenage boys, they already have preconceived notions of sex and sexual desire in a way that is enforced through like patriarchal gendered conditioning of what it's like to grow up as a young boy, that informs the sexual and the eventual sexual and romantic relationships that they form with our main character, who is completely uninterested in them as a person and merely using them for sex and like with the explicit purpose of just doing that. But like, it's so, I don't know, I thought that fraught dynamic was so interesting to see play out, especially from the perspective of this absolutely deranged, sick, evil woman. So yeah, anyways, the next book that I read, because I loved the first two books from Alyssa Nutting that I read, and those are both published like in the mid to early 2010s, I believe. But I think her most recent book was Made for Love, which I have right here. I found it at a used bookstore the other day, and I was like, shut the fuck up. I love this book. And I love the spine. Like, whoa. Anyway, so this is Alyssa Nutting's most recent novel, from what I understand, and it is fucking crazy. Like, it's probably crazier than even any of her short stories or even Tampa, which is like, that's a lot, right? It was so brilliant. We are following this woman named Hazel, who has been married to this crazy ass dude who's basically like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, all like mashed into one person. And his name is Byron Gogol, and he is the CEO and founder of Gogol Technologies, which is essentially a mishmash of Apple, Android, Google, all of the big tech companies that, you know, have monopolies on our lives currently. Gogol essentially runs all of that shit, right? So Hazel has been trapped in this 10-year-long marriage with Byron Gogol for the explicit purpose of her being shut out from the outside world. Granted, her background is not one in which she is very invested in staying in. She's not really wanting to stay with her shitty life and family home and the bullshit of where she was coming from and like not having money. And so when she's swept off her feet and brought to the Gogol, the hub, she thinks it's gonna be fine. She thinks like, okay, well, eventually I'll fall in love with this weirdo freak guy. But what ends up happening is that she runs away from the complex at which she has been trapped in for like a decade, because Byron Gogol has pitched to her the idea of putting a chip in her brain that connects to a chip in his brain that allows him to monitor every aspect of her thoughts, feelings, emotions, body, everything. Granted, already in the hub, Hazel is being monitored on every level and controlled in very tight situations. But with this chip thing, she's like, no, you are taking a step too fucking far, man. So she runs away, runs to her dad's trailer park in like an old person's like retirement home situation complex. And once she's there, she finds out that her like middle-aged dad, or like her older dad, it has since gotten a sex doll named Diane, whom he's in a fictitious, essentially, like relationship with. And she's like, bro, what the fuck? Crazy shit. But then we follow another timeline of this guy who is a con man, and he makes a living by scamming rich women out of their money. Actually, I don't know whether I should say about the next part because I don't know whether it's a spoiler. Let me see what the synopsis says. This book is so interesting in terms of looking at technology, surveillance, love, obviously, the ways that sex and gender and desire can be interrogated through like the modern contemporary sort of fixtures of constant social monitoring and attachment to technology and the physical embodiment of it, and like how it affects people's lives in various ways through very crazy and unhinged scenarios. But yeah, no, I fucking love this book so much. I love the way that it was crazy and wild and just had me feeling so bad for Hazel, but not even in like a pitying way, more of in like a girl, I don't even know what the fuck I would be doing in your situation, because I totally sympathize and understand the actions that you're taking. And I don't really think there's any better option for you. Like, none of those decisions that you made are ones that I necessarily would disagree with. It's just that it's crazy and really sad that you've gotten into the position that you have, you know? This has been adapted into a TV show, which I'm currently in the process of watching, and Alyssa Nutting was and is involved in like the writing of the TV show. But I would say the TV show, which is on HBO Max, diverges from this book in a lot of key ways, and I would be happy to do like a full video breakdown comparing, like analysis comparing the TV show to the book if you're interested. I don't know if anyone is, because Alyssa Nutting seems to be a niche author who is like my fucking favorite now, because whoa, I'm just blown away by all of her work that I have consumed this past month. I don't know, I need to collect physical copies of her other books because each one that I read just kept getting better, and I was just like, her fucking mind. And I tweeted at her and was like, hey, so do you have any more books coming? Because I love your writing. And she was like, yeah, I have an essay collection and a horror novel on its way that she's in the process of writing. And I'm like, I'm so excited. So anyway, if you love a wild, crazy, deranged woman who is like actually very unwell for various reasons in like a physical, psychological way, you should check out any of Alyssa Nutting's books, to be quite honest. But anyway, this was a 5-star read. It was amazing. I kind of went out of order there because in between reading Tampa and Made for Love, I actually read a short story collection by Lauren Groff called Delicate Edible Birds. I absolutely adored Lauren Groff's novel Matrix, which is a historical fiction, like 12th or 11th or 13th century depiction of this nun who runs an abbey after getting kicked out of the Versailles Palace or some shit like that, right? Anyway, so I love that story. I love that book from her. And I also really enjoyed Florida, which is a short story collection from Lauren Groff, which I read quite a few years ago now, but I really, really enjoy this short story collection. I thought so many of them are still memorable to me to this day. There's only a couple in here that I would say are kind of duds for me, but in general I was just like, wow, I love her writing. I think it's so brilliant the way that she is able to convey stories. So with Delicate Edible Birds, another short story collection, I was blown away as well. Lauren Groff is definitely another one of my favorite authors, and I need to read her book Fates and the Furies or something like that. Anyway, so Delicate Edible Birds and Other Stories, bro, there were a lot of very, very interesting stories in here. The title short story of the collection is the last story in the book, I think, and it follows these Allied soldiers during World War II who are like trekking through France, and some shit goes down. There's only one female character in this cohort of all these other dudes, and she is Jewish, and they are trying to get out of the fucking trenches of war, and they run into some unsavory characters along the way. That was a good story, but stories that I enjoyed more and that I found more memorable was this one short story in there that was about a woman who goes to creative writing classes after, being a housewife for a couple of years and feeling really cooped up. And at this creative writing class, she meets this woman called Blythe, I believe. I think the short story is called Blythe. I'm bad at remembering proper nouns, as you know. Anyway, Blythe is this woman who is also a mother and also a housewife, ostensibly, and she has recently gotten out of the mental hospital for a suicide attempt. But these two women just bond immensely, and then they both go on their own sort of artistic journeys. But Blythe is very mentally ill, and so as they become best friends, our main character has to navigate that in a really interesting way that involves both of their entire families and their careers, of course. And it was so interesting to see unfold. I would say most of the short stories in here are, if not all of them, are historical. They are set in a historical setting that I think what Lauren Groff does so well is flesh out these worlds, whether they're contemporary or historical, in a way that's so fucking real. It's just so incredible. I think my past self might have more to say about this book, so I'll insert a clip here if that's relevant. This book, I just now finished it, and I stayed up really late reading it because I was just this shit is crazy. I'm fucking obsessed. It's throughout the 20th century, these various settings, these various characters, and they feel so expansive. This book was published in the early 2010s or 2000s, and so there are some problematic elements of it that I was this is so 2000s, but I don't really view it as a mark against the author, I would say. There's a short story, I think, called the Chen sisters or the Chen girls or something like that, about this town that's small and tight-knit, and this Chinese family that comes in and opens a restaurant that is kind of sketchy, but no one is really looking into it because no one really cares. They're very much not about the outsiders, and then some huge tragedy strikes the town. But we're seeing this all from the eyes of this omniscient almost perspective, but through this teenage girl who is a very good swimmer, and she has a younger sister who's very ADHD and obsessed with birds currently, and her mom is a single mom and a cool mom, but in ways that can be distant and removed and not great. But that short story was also really interesting to me. I love the way that Lauren Groff explores family and female friendships and desire and queer sexuality once again, but I think the way that she incorporates it into all of her writing, from what I've seen, is just so fascinating and so impressive. I'm just very impressed by Lauren Groff's writing, I guess, and I want to read more of hers. I rated the short story collection 5 stars because the short stories in here that really worked for me really worked. They blew me out of the fucking water in a way that I feel a lot of short stories haven't historically done for me. There are a lot of short stories that I read that I'm oh, that was solid, but quite a few of the ones in here were like, that was so good. Like, the writing was fucking impeccable. The characters, the worlds that she constructs, whether they be vague or detailed, just feel so real and grounded in this like reality that is obviously altered through the narrative of like storytelling, but is still so convincing and compelling. Wow, I was just really blown away. And maybe I would rate it more like 4.5 stars because there were some stories that didn't work as much for me. But yeah, great collection. Then I read a quite underwhelming short story collection called Just Pervs by Jess Taylor. This one is very unmemorable to me. I really have no memory of it, to be honest, probably because it's overshadowed by all the other fantastic literary feminist short story collections and fiction and shit that I read this month. But it was just so underwhelming. I don't know, like none of the stories really stuck out to me. Even revisiting the synopsis, I'm just like, I don't even remember that shit, bro. And like, to be honest, I'm someone who really remembers stories, I feel like. I don't know. I just need to have my memory jogged a little bit for books that I've read in the past and I don't remember the details of. But this book just really did not leave an impression on me. So I don't know. And then the next book is Going Up by Amy Lane, which was a romance novella, a male-male romance, which was also very underwhelming and bad, which I rated it 2 stars. But I just read it because it was quick, it was short, it was like 90 pages, and I was in the mood to like break my shit up with some romance. It's just about these 2 guys who live in the same apartment building and they just like run into each other, and one of them is the son of this like Republican politician, and he's in the closet, and then there's this guy who lives in a crammed apartment with a bunch of other roommates in the same building, and they just keep on running into each other in the elevator. I mean, it's whatever. Again, 2 stars. But the next book I read was another story that I found very, very interesting and that I really enjoyed. Florida Woman by Deb Rogers is a book that I rated 4 stars. I didn't give it 5 stars because it's good, but like not a favorite, I would say, but it's still a book that I would highly recommend. It is kind of a cult story, but like you don't really know that it's a cult, or you're not supposed to, and the main character doesn't really up until way later on into the book, but I just do want to say that it's a cult story in case that's not something that like appeals to you. But it is very Floridian. It feels very, I don't know, I love a story set in Florida. I don't know what to fucking tell you, bro. Like, of course I love Florida, Lauren Groff, and Tampa by Alissa Nutting, but like, I don't know, something about Florida is just, I visited it a couple times, and every time I'm just like, it just has this particular vibe that is just so wow. Anyway, in Florida Woman, we're following this woman who has been sentenced to prison because she allegedly like burned down her employer's bar or something, but that's not really what happened. But she made headlines as a Florida woman. Like, Florida woman does this crazy shit, you know, the typical headline. And what she did that was, like, crazy or whatever is that she, like, took this bird that flew into the building and, like, ran out holding the bird. I don't know. But essentially, in attempting to not go to prison, she gets sent onto this parole thing that places her in this like sanctuary habitat for monkeys called Atlas. And Atlas is run by these 3 women who are all very hippy-dippy, like au naturel, like living on the land, no fucking plumbing or running water, just, you know, living with the gators and the mosquitoes in essentially undeveloped territory that has mechanisms to cage like these monkeys. Macaw monkeys, I believe, carries a really dangerous type of hepatitis B that is like lethal to humans. So anyway, there needs to be safety precautions involved here, but essentially our main character becomes taken in by the Atlas community. But the story is interestingly set up because we sort of alternate narratives of our main character being submerged in this new environment and sort of trying to acclimate to it while still having a fucking like ankle monitor on her that's like really chafing at her, and you know she's living off the land and like not really getting enough nutrients because they do these ritual sacrifices where they like, the food that they prepared gets dumped into the forest. I don't know, some fuck shit like that. But he's trying to get acclimated into the community, but some weird shit is going on. And we sort of get insight onto that because in the other chapters, we get little excerpts of the three women working on like a Google Doc together of their website, the Atlas website. It's fascinating. Things sort of unfold as we learn more about our main character's sort of more troubled life and history, and we learn more about the very unsettling, wild, not great things happening at Atlas, despite its facade and presentation and initial sort of offer as being a sanctuary, wonderful, sort of fucking heavenly place of nature and monkeys. But yeah, this was wild, and I really enjoyed the writing. I think this is Deb Rogers' debut novel. I think this book is another like crazy woman story, but the thing is that the reason why it's crazy is not because our main character has some internal fucked up shit. It's because the world around her and the circumstances she finds herself in are just absolutely wild. And yeah, it was so interesting and kept me hooked the whole time. There were some moments of action towards the end that I was like, oh my god, and I was just gripped throughout. And I don't know, I really enjoyed this. And it also has like a lesbian love story-ish romance in there that was like a side thing, but also kind of central to how everything plays out in the plot and in the narrative. This is a good queer woman book for people who want to read about the insanity of Florida and Florida women. The next book that I read was Camgirl by Mazzei. This book is a memoir about Issa getting into camming, and we sort of follow her from her childhood up until her adulthood, and when she gets into camming and all of the shit she gets embroiled in due to being in the online sex industry. And it was very enlightening and compelling and insightful in how it revealed and reconciled and displayed like the reality that our main character Issa, her like stage name is like Una, I think, but it's about her, you know, trying to make a living and also, you know, living in luxury at certain points due to how she gets into it, which is like sugar daddies and then camgirling. It was a really interesting recounting of the author's experience in the industry, I would say. But I think that personally, I rated it 3 stars. Personally, I don't know if the writing itself really did much for me. It felt pretty bland, I guess. I don't know. I feel like I've read memoirs that are more interesting and more well written. But of course, I respect like the nature of the storytelling being one of our author telling us and revealing to us these very intimate and vulnerable things that really actually happened in her real life. As a book, I rated it 3 stars, but I do think it was a really interesting look at the industry and her experiences with it and the different relationships that she builds with like her viewers and then also other cam girls, and then how it affects her real life relationships and her family dynamics, and also, you know, the sort of home life that she was brought up in, and like the different things about her personality and about her own like neuroses that leads to her getting involved in shit that she isn't totally comfortable with later on. And I don't know, I thought it was very interesting. You should check it out if that sounds interesting to you, but definitely trigger warnings for like sexual abuse and harm, obviously, that sort of gets involved here. I thought it was solid. Not necessarily a favorite like memoir though. The next book I read was another stupid contemporary romance called Love, Hate, and Clickbait by Liz Bowery. I rated it 3 stars. I thought it was cute, but not that good. It's about these 2 men who are working on a political campaign for this woman who is the current governor of California and who is running for president. And one of them is this tech guy who got kicked off of the CEO board founding group of a tech company that he helped start in college. And then the other is this like uptight, total fucking asshole who thinks he's straight. But they end up having to fake date because the reporter sort of gets a picture of them in a sort of compromising position, and the governor made some like homophobic remark or something, and it's good for their PR. It's some bullshit. It's some liberal ass stupid. Oh my god. This is like Red, White, and Royal Blue and Boyfriend Material came together and was a lot worse, I would say. Because I think Boyfriend Material and Red, White, and Royal Blue are pretty solid romances. I take issue with different elements of these books, more so with Red, White, and Royal Blue than Boyfriend Material, but Love, Hate, and Clickbait. The enemies to lovers, fake dating trope was fun, it was stupid, it was goofy, you know, but kind of mediocre. I would rate it 3 stars, so. The next book that I read in the month of July was The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson, which I rated like 4.5 stars. Very solid memoir slash essay, like long form essay, I would say. It's quite short, but it is a really beautiful look at lesbian identity and motherhood and the unique experiences for Maggie Nelson herself being married to and in a long-term relationship with and being the stepmother of her like butch partner's child, and then Maggie Nelson's experience getting pregnant and having a baby and, you know, building a family and life together, while also interspersed with different philosophers and writers and artists and theorists and their thoughts on womanhood, lesbianism, feminism, motherhood, child rearing, and her reflections on that, and then like her experiences as an author and writer and like a literary figure, and, you know, like her end of things. And I thought it was such an interesting like meditation on motherhood and examination of like love, and just a snippet of her mind and life that I found very beautiful and enlightening and very, very smart and intelligent, obviously. And I need to revisit this book. I listened to the audiobook because Maggie Nelson narrates it and reads it, but I need to revisit it and like annotate it up and mark out all the different things that really clicked with my brain in reading this, because there were so many things that I was like, in terms of writing, this is such an interesting observation. In terms of like being a lesbian, this is such an interesting observation. In terms of motherhood, this is so good. I really enjoyed this. I get why it's every fucking dyke's favorite book. But yeah, I would definitely recommend it if you haven't already read it, which I feel like fucking everyone has, so. Alright, and the next book that I read was another short story collection by another Floridian woman type author, and that is Vampires in the Lemon Grove and Other Stories by Karen Russell. I didn't love Karen Russell's other book, Swamplandia, but I was willing to give her writing another shot, especially since my friend said that they really enjoyed Vampires in the Lemon Grove. So I picked it up and I also really enjoyed it. I gave it like 4.5 stars. Have we noticed a common thread? If you're a good writer and you're writing a short story collection, I will be giving your short story collection between 4 to 5 stars. Anyway, Vampires in the Lemon Grove is another more Southern Gothic type vibe short story collection that involves the supernatural in some regards, as you can see in the title. There's horror, there's humor, there's more literary stuff. It's a lot of interesting things. There are some short stories that I felt were a little cut short. My favorite short stories were probably the ones about the horse presidents. Like all these presidents across all these different generations are horses in a barn. Then there is a short story about these Japanese girls during the Meiji era who get brought to be turned essentially into like silk worms. They drink this tea that makes them turn into these monster creatures that create silk, and that was a great short story, I think. I think each of her characters are imbued with this sense of like innocent girlhoodness, or this white trash, rural or southern or more, you know, more desolate areas of the Americana landscape. These characters who feel plucked straight from reality and into the slightly altered setting that Karen Russell creates, I am definitely going to read more of her books. They are on my physical TBR. I think I would give it more 4 stars than 5s. But I think that book made me go more into my horror era, kind of, or like darker books, because the next book that I read was Dear Laura by Gemma Amor. This book is a novella that follows this young girl whose best friend gets kidnapped and disappears, and the man who kidnapped her best friend starts sending her letters, and he is a pedophile, and he sort of extorts her for different bits of herself, and does this all the way up till she is an adult. And it is this horrifying tale of her getting these coordinates sent to her in exchange for, like, you know, her underwear or her used menstrual products or her tooth or all of this. And like, he's her stalker as well, so he also endangers her life in a very physical way. In exchange for giving away bits of herself, he gives her these envelopes with coordinates inside them to sort of point towards where the body of her best friend is, of her childhood best friend. It's a really sad and dark and gruesome story that has a somewhat unsatisfying ending, but it sort of alternates timelines of modern, contemporary, adult Laura sort of running through the woods trying to get to this coordinate spot, and child Laura and how she grows up and the different ways that her development is intercepted and altered by the presence of this unnamed stalker named X in her life. And it is very dark and gruesome and disturbing. I've already said that, but you get it. And I rated it 4 stars. It could have been more satisfying and well fleshed out if, not even if it was longer, but if the writing was a bit more complex. It was pretty simple and it was pretty snappy, but I think that, I don't know, I think some things should have been revealed in a more complicated, more sophisticated way, I guess. I don't know, sometimes it felt a little obvious. But generally speaking, great horror novel. Very grounded in reality, a sick, twisted, disturbing reality, but it's not like fantastical or science fiction-y in any particular way. The next book that I read, though, was kind of science fiction-y in a particular way, and also dark and horror and gruesome. And it also involves cults, kind of. It's called The Worm and His Kings by Hailey Piper. It follows this young trans girl whose older girlfriend gets disappeared off of the streets of New York City. It's set in the 90s, I think, and they are 2 homeless queer women trying to survive, and there is this like monster that's sort of going around killing people and disappearing people, and our main character sort of finds this tunnel, this underground society of people who also believe and feel the very real presence of these like haunting empty spaces where she camps out. And I don't know, I think that the way that the story played out and the different elements and the different elements of the world building that get introduced throughout the course of our main character trying to figure out where the fuck her partner is and, you know, what to do with the world she is given and how she chooses to survive in it. And, you know, over the course of this like one night where she goes down and follows this monster creature into the tunnels and has to pretend to be a part of the cult of the worm, and like at a certain point in it I was like, this is kind of like campy. This is like kind of camp, but in that it's also kind of stupid and ridiculous. I don't know how much of this I'm really fucking buying. I don't know if I'm picking up everything that this book is trying to put down, but by the end of the story I was like, okay, fine. But it definitely takes that shift from like urban gothic horror, paranormal horror, into something more science fiction-y, I guess, and grander by the second half or the last third of the novel. And yeah, it was quite short, so it's actually more of a novella, but I rated it 3 stars because it was underwhelming in some regards, but I also get why it would be really interesting to other people. And I think that the conversations it tried to have about like transness and queerness, especially within the context of like the 90s, and the relationship that our main character has to herself, her past, her relationship, her trauma, and to the world, was, I don't know, it felt very surface level almost. but the book was trying to do something grander with like the fantasy aspect of it. So yeah, I mean, I rated it 3 stars. It's solid, not my favorite, but enjoyable. The next book that I read in the month of July was Trick Mirror by Tolentino. This is an essay collection that I am in the midst of marking up and annotating. I want to do a makeup look and like side by side almost review of these 2 books because they have a similar color scheme, I guess. I don't know, I think it would be fun. But yeah, I want to mark both of these books up and maybe do a video about like feminist essay collections, maybe, I don't know, because there are a couple that are on my mind that I kind of want to discuss more at length. But yeah, anyways, I listened to the audiobook, which is also read by the author, which I love, but I did have the physical copy on my physical TBR, so I've been going through it and sort of highlighting and revisiting the words and the phrases and the references and the sentences and ideas that I felt were delineated really well in this essay collection, and that really stuck with me. And I think that it's quite brilliant. I understand why this won so many awards and is so critically acclaimed. I rated it 4.5 stars and rounded up to 5 on Goodreads. I think that the way that this book attempts to eviscerate our contemporary pop culture and the socio-political commentary that it makes, some of it fell flat for me, but a lot of it, especially when interspersed with her personal life and reflections on her own experiences, were really interesting to me. I think she explores a bunch of different topics like beauty and female characters and delusion and ecstasy, because, you know, reflections on self-delusion. And her essay, Ecstasy, I think is one that a lot of people like, and I also it very much resonated with me. Her writing is very good. She is very good at encapsulating and interrogating very specific things in a broader context to make a larger cultural commentary, and also from like a journalistic perspective and a media criticism perspective, I would say. But I think that it fell flat for me in its politics in quite a few ways. Tolentino is very much like a left-leaning liberal type, and so I think that some of the offhand remarks about like China's alleged social credit system or like Venezuela or whatever, it's also very 2016. It's like a very much a Trump era type book, which like, I don't know, it's kind of exhausting to me. It's so played out. I just think that a lot of things that have been said have already been said. I take issue with the interrogation and the analysis and the view of Trump as a uniquely bad political actor within the specter of American politics, when in reality American politics at large are a scam, you know? And I don't know. So I think that her one essay on being a con artist and a scammer and like Firefest, but also how that relates to our contemporary generation constantly doing our best to scam ourselves and each other's, because that is the world that we've been raised into, is so interesting, because like so much of this book is also really looking at and examining our relationship to technology and social media and how it's completely altered the fabric of our social environment and also our individual selves and how we relate to ourselves and how we think of ourselves, how we conceptualize our identities, how we monetize them, how social media functions in this way. So I think like it's really enlightening. I think that there were some moments that like more ideologically fell flat for me, but the writing in general, top notch and very inspirational for me as a writer, I would say. And the type of writing that she does and the way that people receive her writing is sort of the way that I want my writing to be perceived or received, I guess. Oh, and that's a little plug for a Substack that me and my podcast co-host will be launching. Either it has been launched by the time this video drops, and if so, it'll be linked in the description, or it is going to be. And for that Substack, it's basically like Medium, but more newsletter-ish, and I'm going to be publishing more coherent socio-political, cultural commentary and media analysis stuff on there in like more long form essay formats, as well as my podcast co-host. We have a lot of thoughts on media, obviously, that's why we have our podcast, but also like I want to talk specifically about different themes and stuff that I find interconnected throughout books. So subscribe to my Substack if you want to read some of my essay writing and shit. But anyway, that's that. Finally, the last book I read in July is Come Closer by Sara, which is a short horror novel about a demon possessing a woman's body. It was published in like the early 2000s, so there were some problematic homophobic and racist remarks throughout this book that I was like, okay, that would not fly if this was published today, but whatever. It was like fucking 2003. This book I thought was interesting, but also mid. I rated it 3 stars. I thought that the vibes and like the general concept of this woman becoming possessed by a demon and how it alters her reality and how she experiences her life, solid. I fuck with it. But the writing didn't do much for me, and I would also say that the way the demon lore, I don't know, I found it a little bit questionable. I'm not that convinced. There were some pretty striking imagery and horror elements to it, but you know, I would recommend it if you're looking for a demon possession type horror, but it wasn't a standout for me. Solid, not great. Like the typical, that's how I feel towards most of my 3-star ratings. So yeah, I enjoyed it, and you should pick it up if you're in a horror mood, I would say. And also, I think Books and Lala, Kayla, rated this book like 5 stars, so if your tastes align more with hers than with mine, then I think you would enjoy it more. So yeah, those are all of the books that I read in the month of July. I hope July was also a good reading month for you, as it was for me, despite July being so fucking long. Just as July was long, this video is really fucking long, so sorry about the length of this wrap-up, but I did sort of go in depth with all 20 of the books. But yeah, if you want to get my mid-month more coherent thoughts, I would say you should become a patron, and you can also friend me on Goodreads if you would like to. And yeah, like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And I do hope to see you in a future video. But thanks so much for watching, and bye!